Sergeant Mark Bryant stands at attention, his eyes fixed on the sneering blue face of Princess Mira. The Benzite royal's tentacle-like facial appendages quiver with disgust as she berates him, her voice echoing through the crystalline halls of the embassy. "I refuse to be guarded by this pink-skinned barbarian," Mira spits, her iridescent eyes narrowing. "Where are my Benzite guards? I demand proper protection." Mark maintains his stoic demeanor, years of military discipline keeping his expression neutral despite the princess's tirade. He's faced down plasma cannons and xenomorphs, but this diplomatic assignment might prove his toughest challenge yet. Ambassador Zorn, a tall Benzite, with wisdom etched in the lines of his azure face, steps forward. "Princess Mira, I must remind you that Sergeant Bryant's presence is a non-negotiable term of our peace treaty with Earth. The human-Benzite alliance depends on cooperation and mutual trust." Mira scoffs, turning her back on both of them. "I trust these humans about as far as I could throw one of their lumbering forms." As Mira retreats to her quarters, Mark exchanges a glance with Ambassador Zorn. The gravity of the situation isn't lost on either of them. This tenuous peace, forged after years of territorial disputes and shared star systems, balances on a knife's edge. Mark takes up his post outside Mira's door, his enhanced hearing picking up her continued rants about human inferiority. An embassy staff member approaches, their expression apologetic. "Sergeant, you should know, Princess Mira hasn't left her room or interacted with any humans since her arrival 3 days ago." Mark nods, processing this information. His mission isn't just about physical protection. He needs to bridge an interstellar cultural divide. The fate of two worlds might hinge on his ability to connect with this xenophobic royal. As Earth's sun sets, casting long shadows through the embassy's towering windows, Mark remains vigilant. He's reviewing security protocols when a piercing alarm shatters the evening calm. Heart racing, Mark bursts into Mira's quarters. The room is in disarray, signs of a struggle evident, but the princess is nowhere to be seen. He rushes to the security terminal, bringing up the footage. The playback reveals a chilling scene, masked figures seeming to materialize out of thin air, using advanced cloaking technology to bypass the embassy's defenses. They swiftly overpower Mira, who fights back with surprising ferocity before being subdued. Mark's mind races, years of combat experience kicking in. The method, the tech, this has all the hallmarks of the Centauri separatists, a terrorist group vehemently opposed to interspecies cooperation. As he initiates pursuit protocols, the weight of the situation crashes down on him. If he fails to recover Princess Mira, Earth and Benzar could be plunged into an interstellar war. Billions of lives on both planets hang in the balance. Mark checks his gear, mind already formulating strategies. He may not have won Mira's trust yet, but he'll be damned if he lets her down now. It's time to show the princess and the galaxy what a human soldier is truly capable of. Mark's mind raced as he sprinted through the embassy's corridors, the alarm still blaring in his ears. He tapped his wrist communicator, barking orders to the security team while simultaneously pulling up a holographic map of the city. "Computer, track Princess Mira's biosignature," he commanded, his eyes scanning the translucent display floating above his forearm. A faint blue dot pulsed on the outskirts of the metropolis, and Mark's mind focused. The Centauri separatists were moving fast. He burst into the embassy's garage, leaping onto a sleek hoverbike. The engine hummed to life beneath him as he gunned the throttle, the bike shooting out into the neon-lit streets of New Washington. Wind whipped past Mark's face as he weaved through traffic, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to navigate the bustling lanes with precision. The blue dot on his holomap grew stronger as he approached the city limits, leading him to an abandoned industrial complex that loomed against the night sky. As Mark slowed the hoverbike, his trained eyes caught movement in the shadows. He dismounted silently, drawing his stun baton. The air crackled with tension as he crept towards the facility's perimeter. A guard emerged from behind a rusted container, weapon raised. Mark moved like lightning, closing the distance in 3 swift strides. His baton connected with the guard's wrist, sending the gun clattering to the ground. A quick jab to the solar plexus, followed by a precise strike to the temple, and the separatist crumpled unconsciously. Mark dragged the guard's body into the shadows, his mind already focused on the next obstacle. He spotted a ventilation shaft high on the building's wall, just wide enough for him to squeeze through. With a running start, he scaled the corroded metal surface, his fingers finding purchase in the smallest of crevices. Inside the complex, Mark navigated a labyrinth of corridors, his enhanced hearing picking up snippets of conversation. He pressed himself against a wall, listening intently to two separatists as they passed. "The princess is secure in the East Wing," one said. "Once the demands are sent, this human Benzite alliance will crumble." Mark's heart made. He had to move fast. Crawling through a narrow air duct, he finally reached the room where Mira was being held. Peering through a grate, he was surprised to see the princess sitting calmly, her posture regal despite her captivity. There was no fear in her eyes, only a cold perseverance that made Mark reassess his initial impression of her. He waited for the perfect moment, then burst from the vent in a flurry of motion. His fist connected with the jaw of the nearest guard before the man could even register the intrusion. Spinning low, Mark swept the legs out from under a second attacker. To his astonishment, Mira sprang into action. Her movements were fluid and precise as she disarmed a third guard, using his own weapon to incapacitate him. For a brief moment, human and Benzite fought in perfect synchronization, a deadly dance that left their opponents sprawled on the floor. As the last guard fell, Mark turned to Mira, expecting gratitude. Instead, she fixed him with an icy stare. "I had the situation under control, Sergeant," she said coolly. "Your intervention was unnecessary." Mark blinked, taken aback. "With all due respect, Princess, you were outnumbered and fully capable of handling myself," she interrupted, "though I suppose your combat skills are adequate." There was a hint of something new in her eyes as she regarded him. Not warmth exactly, but a grudging respect. Their escape from the complex proved to be a gauntlet of challenges. They navigated laser grids, deactivated security drones, and outsmarted patrols. To Mark's surprise, Mira matched him step for step, her quick thinking complementing his tactical approach. During a brief respite, hidden in a supply closet, Mira's demeanor shifted. "I suppose I owe you an explanation, Sergeant," she said quietly. "My hostility towards you wasn't entirely genuine. I'm an operative in Benzite intelligence. My behavior was partly to maintain my cover." Mark processed this revelation, pieces falling into place. "So this assignment was more than a simple diplomatic posting," Mira finished. "We suspected a plot against the Alliance, but we didn't anticipate this level of organization." Their conversation was cut short as the door burst open, revealing a towering Benzite with cybernetic enhancements glinting in the low light. "Krell," Mira hissed, her tentacles quivering with barely held back rage. The Separatist leader's laughter echoed through the room. "Princess Mira, Sergeant Bryant, how convenient to have you both here." His cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on them. "Did you really think your pitiful alliance could succeed? There are those on both our worlds who understand the folly of this cooperation." Mark's mind reeled at the implication. "You're working with humans?" Krell's grin was savage. "The galaxy is changing, Sergeant. Some of us are simply ahead of the curve." The ensuing battle was fierce and chaotic. Mark and Mira fought back to back, their styles blending seamlessly. Human strength and adaptability merged with Benzite precision and speed. In a heart-stopping moment, Krell leveled his weapon at Mira. Without hesitation, Mark threw himself in front of her, taking the full force of the energy blast to his chest. The impact sent him crashing into a control panel, electricity arcing around him. Through a haze of pain, Mark saw Mira's eyes widen in shock. Then her face hardened, and she launched herself at Krell with renewed fury. The princess became a blur of motion, her attacks relentless and precise. Mark struggled to his feet, his tactical mind assessing the situation. He spotted a weakness in Krell's defenses and called out to Mira. Without missing a beat, she adapted her strategy, creating an opening that Mark exploited. Together, they drove Krell back, their coordinated assault proving too much for even his enhanced abilities. With a final, devastating combination of moves, they brought the Separatist leader to his knees. But Krell wasn't finished. As Mira secured his restraints, he laughed maniacally. "You've lost," he spat. "This entire facility is set to self-destruct. You'll never make it out alive." As if on cue, alarms began to blare, and the floor trembled beneath their feet. Mark and Mira exchanged a look of understanding. Without a word, they began to run. The complex became a maze of collapsing corridors and exploding equipment. Mark and Mira navigated the chaos, their earlier teamwork evolving into an almost prescient connection. They moved as one, anticipating each other's actions, covering each other's blind spots. They burst out of the facility just as a massive explosion rocked the ground. The force of the blast sent them tumbling, and Mark instinctively pulled Mira close, shielding her with his body as debris rained down around them. For a moment they lay there, hearts pounding, the heat of the inferno washing over them. Mark became acutely aware of Mira's closeness, the alien yet not unpleasant scent of her skin. As the dust settled, they slowly disentangled themselves, eyes meeting in a moment of shared intensity. The barriers between them had crumbled along with the complex, leaving behind a connection neither had anticipated. The wail of approaching sirens broke the spell. Mark helped Mira to her feet, his hand lingering on hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "We should go," he said, his voice rough from smoke and exertion. Mira nodded, her usual haughtiness replaced by something softer, more uncertain. "Yes, we should." As emergency vehicles converged on the scene, Mark and Mira stood side by side, watching the flames consume what remained of the separatist base. Both knew that this was only the beginning. The revelation of a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of their governments had changed everything. Mark glanced at Mira, seeing her in a new light. She met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Together, they would face it head-on. The journey back to the Benzite embassy was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Mark's body ached from the battle, but his mind remained sharp, hyper-aware of Mira's presence beside him. As they approached the imposing structure, he noticed her posture stiffen, her tentacles curling tightly against her neck. The moment they crossed the threshold, they were engulfed in a sea of concerned faces. Benzite and human staff alike swarmed around them, voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions and exclamations. Mark instinctively moved closer to Mira, his hand hovering near the small of her back, ready to guide her through the crowd if needed. Ambassador Zorn's arrival parted the throng like a shockwave. His usually composed features were twisted with worry, his facial tentacles writhing agitatedly. "Princess Mira, Sergeant Bryant, thank the celestial spheres you're safe. Come with me immediately." They followed Zorn to a secure debriefing room, the ambassador's long strides forcing Mark and Mira to quicken their pace. As the door sealed shut behind them, the outside world faded away, leaving only the harsh reality of their situation. Mark's voice was steady as he recounted the events of the past few hours, but his fists clenched involuntarily as he described Krell's revelations. Beside him, Mira filled in the details with clinical precision, her tone betraying no emotion. Yet as she spoke of the complex's destruction, her eyes flickered to Mark for the briefest moment, a flash of something unreadable passing between them. Ambassador Zorn's reaction was immediate and severe. His skin paled to a sickly gray as he processed the implications of their report. "A conspiracy? Reaching into both our governments?" he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. Then, straightening suddenly, he barked orders into his communicator. "Initiate protocol Omega-9. Full communications blackout, effective immediately. Lock down all non-essential areas of the embassy." Alarms began to blare throughout the building, and Mark could hear the distant sound of security barriers slamming into place. Zorn turned to them, his expression grave. "For your safety and the integrity of our investigation, you'll both be confined to the East Wing until further notice. I'm sorry, but we can't risk any leaks at this stage." As they were escorted to their temporary quarters, Mark felt the adrenaline that had sustained him begin to ebb. Exhaustion settled into his bones like lead, and he noticed Mira's steps faltering slightly beside him. The wing they entered was luxurious, but clearly designed for extended stays, with comfortable living areas and a small, serene garden visible through reinforced windows. A medical team was waiting for them, and Mark found himself ushered to one side of the room while Mira was led to the other. As a Benzite medic began cleaning a gash on his arm, Mark's eyes were drawn to Mira. She sat rigidly as a human doctor examined her, her gaze distant and unfocused. "Sergeant Bryant?" The medic's voice snapped Mark back to attention. "I need to check for internal injuries. Please remove your shirt." As Mark complied, he caught Mira watching him, her eyes tracing the contours of his torso with unmistakable curiosity. He felt a sudden irrational urge to flex his muscles, to demonstrate the capabilities of his human physiology. Instead, he forced himself to relax, allowing the medic to complete her examination. The medical team departed, leaving Mark and Mira alone in the silent wing. An awkward tension filled the air, neither quite sure how to navigate this new dynamic between them. It was Mira who finally broke the silence. "Your combat skills," she began, her voice tentative. "Where did you receive your training?" Mark blinked, surprised by the question. I started in the standard Earth military program, but then I was recruited for special operations. Spent a few years with an elite unit before this diplomatic assignment." Mira nodded, her tentacles rippling with interest. "I see. And your enhanced reflexes, are they common among humans?" "Not exactly," Mark replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I volunteered for some experimental augmentations. Cutting-edge stuff, still classified." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "What about you? I've never seen a Benzite move the way you did back there." A flicker of pride crossed Mira's face. "I am uniquely trained. As a royal operative, I have access to techniques not taught to the general population." Their conversation continued, tentatively at first, then with growing animation. Mark found himself fascinated by Mira's descriptions of Benzite intelligence operations, while she peppered him with questions about Earth's diverse military forces. As they talked, the initial awkwardness between them began to dissolve, replaced by a cautious camaraderie. As night fell, Mark found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with the implications of Krell's words. He made his way to the small garden, hoping the sight of familiar earth plants might calm his thoughts. To his surprise, he found Mira already there, her silhouette outlined by the soft glow of Earth's moon. She turned at his approach, her skin shimmering with an ethereal iridescence in the moonlight. Mark's breath caught in his throat, struck by the alien beauty before him. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then, without warning, the door to the garden burst open. Captain Dax strode in, his face grim. "Bryant, Princess Mira," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have a situation." Mark tensed, instinctively moving closer to Mira. Whatever was coming, he knew their fates were now irrevocably intertwined. As Dax began to speak, Mark steeled himself for the challenges ahead, acutely aware of Mira's presence at his side. Together they faced the uncertain future, united by a bond forged in fire and strengthened by newfound understanding. Understanding. Mark's heart raced as he processed the gravity of Captain Dax's words. "We're relocating you both to Mars," Dax said, his voice low and urgent. "There's a secure diplomatic compound on Olympus Mons. It's our best chance to keep you safe while we continue the investigation." Mira's tentacles curled tightly, a sign of tension Mark had come to recognize. "And what of the conspiracy?" she asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "We have leads," Dax replied, glancing between them. "But we need you both out of harm's way for now. A transport is waiting. We leave in 30 minutes. As they hurried to gather their essentials, Mark found himself hyper-aware of Mira's movements. The events of the past few days had forged a connection between them that defied easy categorization. Human and Benzite, thrown together by circumstance, now united by a shared purpose. The journey to Mars passed in a blur of tense silence and furtive glances. As their ship approached the red planet, Mark's breath caught at the sight of Olympus Mons looming on the horizon. The diplomatic compound was barely visible, a testament to its designer's skill in blending the facility with the Martian landscape. Upon landing, they were immediately ushered into a meeting with Ambassador Zorn and a new face. Colonel Reeves, head of Martian security. The colonel's weathered features spoke of years of hard-won experience, his eyes sharp as he assessed the newcomers. "Welcome to Mars," Reeves said, his voice gruff. "I hope you understand the gravity of the situation. This facility is now on high alert. Your presence here must remain absolutely confidential." As Zorn began outlining security protocols, Mark felt a subtle shift in the air. He turned to find Mira already looking at him, her expression unreadable. In that moment, he realized their shared ordeal had fundamentally altered their relationship. The initial distrust and cultural barriers had given way to something deeper, more complex. Their silent exchange was interrupted by a ping from Mark's secure comm device, a message from Captain Dax, encrypted and marked urgent. Mark's pulse quickened as he read, "New intel. Key suspects tracked to Phobos outpost. Covert infiltration required. Maintain absolute secrecy. High-level involvement suspected on both sides. Details to follow. Stay alert." Mark discreetly showed the message to Mira, watching as her eyes widened slightly. The implications were clear. Their role in this conspiracy was just getting started. As the briefing concluded, they were shown to their quarters. The facility was a marvel of engineering, its reinforced windows offering breathtaking views of the Martian landscape. Yet Mark found it hard to appreciate the scenery, his mind racing with the implications of their new mission. "We should prepare," Mira said, breaking the silence. "The training facilities here are said to be exemplary." Mark nodded, grateful for her focus. "Agreed. We'll need to be at our best for whatever comes next." The following days were a whirlwind of intensive training and strategy sessions. Mark and Mira spent hours in the compound's state-of-the-art combat simulator, honing their skills and developing new tactics that blended their unique abilities. During a particularly grueling session, Mark found himself pinned by a holographic opponent. Without hesitation, Mira flowed into action, her movements precise and deadly. As the simulation ended, they stood face to face, breathing heavily, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. "Nice move," Mark said, acutely aware of their physical proximity. Mira's tentacles rippled, a gesture he now recognized as a mix of pride and something else, something she seemed reluctant to acknowledge. "We make an effective team," she replied, her voice soft. The moment was broken by an announcement over the facility's comm system. A formal dinner was to be held that evening, celebrating recent progress in the negotiations. As they parted to prepare, Mark found himself uncharacteristically nervous about the event. Hours later, he stood adjusting his formal uniform in front of a mirror. The door chimed, and he turned to see Mira enter, resplendent in traditional Benzite ceremonial garb. The iridescent fabric clung to her form, accentuating her alien beauty in a way that made Mark's breath catch. "You look," he began, struggling to find words that wouldn't cross professional boundaries. "As do you," Mira replied, her eyes roaming over his uniformed figure with unmistakable appreciation. As they made their way to the dining hall, Mark became aware of a new tension between them, electric and undeniable. The rational part of his mind warned of the potential consequences, the complications a human-Benzite relationship could bring in this fragile political climate. Yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt towards her, a connection that transcended their physiological differences. The dinner was a lavish affair, with dignitaries from both Earth and Benzar in attendance. As Mark and Mira took their seats, a latecomer arrived, causing a stir among the guests. Dr. Alara Venn, a renowned xenobiologist, made her way to the table, her keen eyes immediately focusing on the unlikely pair. "Sergeant Bryant, Princess Mira," she said, her voice rich with curiosity. "I've been hoping to meet you both. Your partnership is quite fascinating from a physiological perspective." Mark felt Mira stiffen beside him, her discomfort palpable. He placed a reassuring hand near hers, not quite touching, but offering silent support. "Dr. Venn," he replied, keeping his tone neutral, "I wasn't aware you were involved in the negotiations." The doctor's smile was enigmatic. "Oh, I have many interests here on Mars. The potential for human-Benzite compatibility is just one of them." As the evening progressed, Mark found himself increasingly on edge. Dr. Venn's presence and pointed questions about their experiences together felt off, somehow connected to the larger conspiracy they were investigating. Seeking a moment of respite, Mark made his way to a secluded balcony overlooking the Martian expanse. He was unsurprised when Mira joined him moments later, her presence both a comfort and a source of new tension. "Your thoughts?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "Something's not right," he replied, his voice low. "Ven's interest in us. It feels calculated." Mira nodded, her tentacles curling in agreement. "We must be cautious. Our mission to Phobos—" She broke off as Mark placed a hand on her arm, the first intentional contact between them outside of training or medical necessity. The sensation was electric, alien yet thrilling. For a moment they stood frozen, the vast Martian landscape forgotten as they grappled with the intensity of their connection. The moment was shattered by the harsh buzz of Mark's comm device. Colonel Reeves's voice crackled through, urgent and commanding. "Bryant, Princess Mira, my office, now!" As they hurried through the compound's corridors, Mark's mind raced. Whatever Reeves had discovered, he knew it would complicate their already dangerous mission. Glancing at Mira, he saw his own perseverance mirrored in her eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Two beings from different worlds, united by a bond that defied easy explanation. The door to Reeves's office loomed before them, promising new revelations and greater risks. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. At his side, Mira stood tall, her presence a silent affirmation of their shared purpose. With a nod to each other, they stepped forward, ready to confront the next chapter in their intertwined destinies. Destiny. The door slid open, revealing Colonel Reeves hunched over a holographic display. His face was grim as he looked up at them. "We've received new intelligence," Reeves said without preamble. "There's a facility on Phobos that may be connected to our investigation. We need you two to infiltrate and gather information." Mark and Mira exchanged a quick glance. This was the mission they'd been preparing for. "When do we leave?" Mark asked, his voice steady. "Immediately," Reeves replied. "A stealth shuttle is prepped and waiting. You'll be briefed en route." Within the hour, Mark and Mira found themselves aboard the sleek, dark vessel, hurtling through space towards the Martian moon. As they neared Phobos, Mark studied the barren, potato-shaped satellite through the view screen. "Approaching Phobos," the shuttle's AI announced. "Estimated time to landing, 15 minutes. Suddenly, the shuttle lurched violently. Warning klaxons blared as red emergency lights bathed the cockpit. "What's happening?" Mira asked, her tentacles curling tightly around her seat's armrests. Mark's fingers flew over the control panel. "Solar flare," he growled. "It's interfering with our systems. The cloaking device is failing." The shuttle bucked and shuddered as they entered Phobos's thin atmosphere. Mark fought with the controls, trying to stabilize their descent. Mira's alien physiology allowed her to remain calm and focused despite the chaos. "There," she said, pointing to a relatively flat area on the moon's cratered surface. "We can land there." Mark nodded, guiding the craft towards the spot. The landing was rough, but they touched down in one piece. As the dust settled around them, they realized their predicament. "We've lost our stealth advantage," Mark said, running a hand through his hair. "The outpost sensors will have picked up our landing." Mira's eyes narrowed in concentration. "Then we adapt. We need a new strategy." Mark nodded, an idea forming. "What if we pose as a diplomatic couple? An official inspection would explain our presence." Mira's tentacles rippled in agreement. "It could work. The tension between us and our growing familiarity. It lends authenticity to the ruse." They quickly donned their formal attire, stored for just such a contingency. As they exited the shuttle, Mark offered his arm to Mira. She took it, her cool, alien skin sending a shiver through him. They approached the outpost's main entrance, where a small, welcoming committee had already gathered. At its head stood a tall, charismatic man with piercing blue eyes and a disarming smile. "Welcome to Phobos Outpost," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Commander Jax Thorne. We weren't expecting visitors, but we're always happy to accommodate our diplomatic friends." Mark shook Thorne's hand firmly. "Sergeant Mark Bryant, Earth Diplomatic Corps. This is Princess Mira of Benzar. We're conducting an impromptu inspection of facilities in the Mars system." Thorne's eyebrow arched slightly, but his smile never wavered. "Of course, we're happy to oblige. Please, allow me to give you a tour." As they moved through the facility, Mark and Mira maintained their couple facade, exchanging subtle touches and meaningful glances. It wasn't difficult. The chemistry between them was real, even if the context was fabricated. The outpost appeared to be a standard research facility at first glance, but both Mark and Mira noticed discrepancies. The number of security personnel seemed excessive for a simple research station, and there were an unusual number of restricted areas. "And here we have our primary research lab," Thorne said, gesturing to a large sealed door. "I'm afraid this area is off-limits to visitors due to the sensitive nature of our work." Before Mark could press for more information, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Commander Thorne, I wasn't aware we had guests." Mark turned to see Dr. Alara Venn striding towards them, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed interest. "Dr. Venn," Mark said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice, "I didn't expect to see you here." Venn smiled, her teeth gleaming white against her dark skin. "Oh, I'm here for a routine biological survey. The unique environment of Phobos offers fascinating research opportunities." Mark felt Mira tense beside him. Venn's presence here, so soon after their encounter on Mars, couldn't be a coincidence. As night fell on Phobos, a relative term given the moon's rapid rotation, Mark and Mira were shown to shared quarters. The door had barely closed behind them when Mira spoke, her voice low and urgent. "We need to investigate further. Venn's presence here is suspicious." Mark nodded, acutely aware of their close proximity in the small room. "Agreed, but we need to be careful. Thorne seems sharp, and there's no telling who else might be involved." Their eyes met, and suddenly the air between them felt charged. The tension that had been building since their first meeting reached a breaking point. Without conscious thought, Mark found himself leaning in, his lips meeting Mira's in a passionate kiss. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Mira's alien physiology made the kiss both familiar and thrillingly new. Her tentacles curled around his neck, pulling him closer as they lost themselves in the moment. Suddenly, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. They broke apart, breathing heavily, as a computerized voice echoed through the outpost. "Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel report to designated stations." Mark and Mira shared a look of understanding. This was their chance to uncover the truth. "Let's move," Mark said, already heading for the door. They slipped into the corridor, blending in with the rush of personnel responding to the alarm. Using their combined skills in stealth and misdirection, they made their way towards Sector 7. As they rounded a corner, they caught a glimpse of Dr. Venn disappearing into a restricted lab. Without hesitation, they followed, using Mark's enhanced reflexes and Mira's unique abilities to bypass the security measures. They entered the lab to find Venn hunched over a console, furiously inputting commands. The room was filled with strange, pulsating artifacts that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "Stop right there, Doctor," Mark called out, his voice firm. Venn whirled to face them, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "This is bigger than all of us. It's about the future of both our species." Before she could continue, the lab door burst open. Commander Thorne strode in, flanked by armed guards. His charming demeanor had vanished, replaced by cold persistence. "I'm afraid your inspection ends here," Thorne said, his voice hard. "You've stumbled onto something far beyond your clearance level." Mark and Mira tensed, ready for action. The artifacts around them pulsed with increasing intensity, bathing the room in an otherworldly glow. As Thorne raised his hand to signal his guards, Mark knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The course of their mission forever. In that instant, the artifacts surrounding them pulsed with blinding intensity. A wave of energy swept through the room, knocking everyone off their feet. Mark felt a searing pain course through his body, his vision blurring as he fought to remain conscious. Beside him, Mira let out an alien cry of distress. As quickly as it began, the energy surge subsided. Mark struggled to his feet, his head spinning. He reached out for Mira, only to find her already standing, her eyes wide with shock. What just happened?" Mark gasped, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. A computerized voice announced, "Biohazard detected. Initiating quarantine protocols. Commander Thorne, looking shaken but determined, barked orders into his comm device. Lock down the entire sector. No one leaves until we understand what's going on. Dr. Venn, who had been thrown against a console, struggled to her feet. Her eyes darted between Mark and Mira, a mixture of fear and excitement evident on her face. The device, she whispered. It's activated. Within minutes, a team in hazmat suits burst into the lab. Mark and Mira found themselves being ushered into a secure medical bay, their protests falling on deaf ears. As the doors sealed behind them, they exchanged worried glances, both sensing that something fundamental had changed. Days blurred together as Mark and Mira were subjected to a battery of tests and examinations. The outpost's chief medical officer, Dr. Lyra Chen, oversaw their care with a mix of professional detachment and barely concealed fascination. Your cellular structure is evolving, Dr. Chen explained during one of her visits, her eyes fixed on a holographic display of their DNA. It's as if your genetic code is rewriting itself, creating a hybrid of human and benzite physiologies. Mark stared at his reflection in a nearby monitor, noting the faint blue tinge that had begun to spread across his skin. Beside him, Mira ran a hand over her face, her tentacles noticeably shorter than they had been days ago. How is this possible? Mira asked, her voice a mix of wonder and apprehension. Dr. Chen shook her head. The device you were exposed to, it seems to have triggered some kind of genetic alteration process. We're still trying to understand the full extent of the changes. As the days passed, Mark and Mira found themselves growing closer, their shared experience creating a bond unlike anything they had known before. They spent hours talking, sharing their fears and hopes, as their bodies continued to change. One night, as they sat in their quarantine room, Mark reached out to touch Mira's hand. The moment their skin made contact, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. Suddenly, Mark could hear Mira's thoughts as clearly as if she were speaking aloud. Did you... Mark began, his eyes wide with shock. Mira nodded, her expression mirroring his own. I can hear you too. It's like our minds are linked. This new development both thrilled and terrified them. As they explored their newfound telepathic connection, they struggled to maintain their individual identities while sharing an unprecedented level of intimacy. Meanwhile, news of the incident had spread beyond Phobos. Earth and Benzar were in an uproar, with political factions on both worlds calling for immediate action. Ambassador Zorn arrived at the outpost, accompanied by a team of scientists and Dr. Alara Venn, who had been granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation. The hybrid program was never meant to go this far, Venn explained during a tense meeting with Zorn and the outpost leadership. We were trying to create intermediaries, individuals who could bridge the gap between our species. But this is beyond anything we imagined. As Mark and Mira's transformation progressed, they discovered new abilities emerging almost daily. Their strength and sensory perception increased dramatically, and they found themselves able to process information at an astonishing rate. The outpost on Phobos became a hub of intense scientific study and political maneuvering. Delegations from Earth and Benzar arrived, each vying for control over the situation. Mark and Mira found themselves at the center of heated debates about the future of interspecies relations. Their relative peace was shattered when Commander Jax Thorne, who had initially supported the hybrid program, made his move. Leading a group of extremist followers, he attempted to seize control of the medical facility where Mark and Mira were being held. They are the future, Thorne shouted as he and his team breached the quarantine zone. We can't let short-sighted politicians decide their fate. Mark and Mira, alerted to the danger by their enhanced senses, sprang into action. Working in perfect synchronization, they repelled the attack, their new abilities proving more than a match for Thorne's forces. As the last of the attackers were subdued, Mark and Mira stood side by side, breathing heavily. They turned to face each other, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding. Their reflection in a nearby window showed two beings who were neither fully human nor fully benzite, but something entirely new. Ambassador Zorn approached them, his expression a mix of awe and concern. I think it's time we had a serious discussion about your future, he said, gesturing for them to follow him. As they walked away from the scene of the failed kidnapping attempt, Mark and Mira knew that their journey was just the beginning. The future of two worlds now rested in their hands, and the path ahead was as uncertain as it was exciting. Exciting and uncertain as it was promising. The journey to Earth's moon was a blur of medical examinations, debriefings, and tense negotiations between Earth and Benzar officials. Mark and Mira found themselves at the center of a diplomatic storm, their very existence challenging long-held notions of species identity and interstellar relations. As their shuttle docked at Nexus 1, the lunar facility specially designed to house them, Mark felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The base's sleek, modern architecture stood in stark contrast to the barren lunar landscape visible through the viewport. "Welcome to your new home," Dr. Lyra Chen said, gesturing for them to follow her through the airlock. "We've designed this facility to accommodate your unique physiology while providing a neutral ground for continued research and diplomatic talks." Mark and Mira exchanged glances, their telepathic link humming with shared curiosity and caution. As they stepped into the main corridor, they were struck by the blend of human and benzite design elements. The walls curved organically, reminiscent of benzite architecture, while the lighting and control interfaces were distinctly human in origin. Dr. Chen led them to the medical bay, a state-of-the-art facility filled with equipment from both worlds. "We'll need to run a full battery of tests to assess your current condition," she explained, her voice professional but tinged with barely concealed excitement. Over the next few hours, Mark and Mira underwent a series of comprehensive examinations. They watched as holographic displays flickered to life, showing detailed scans of their hybrid physiology. "Fascinating," Dr. Chen murmured, studying the results. "The hybridization process appears to have stabilized. Your cellular structure shows a perfect blend of human and benzite DNA." Mark caught his reflection in a nearby screen and was startled by what he saw. His skin had settled into a permanent, subtle blue hue, while Mira's facial tentacles had evolved into more human-like features. Despite the changes, he still recognized himself and Mira in their new appearances. As they left the medical bay, they were met by Ambassador Zorn, his expression grave. "We need to talk," he said, ushering them into a nearby conference room. "Your transformation has become public knowledge, and the reaction has been intense." Zorn activated a large view screen, showing news feeds from both Earth and Benzar. Protests filled the streets of major cities on both planets. Some groups held signs supporting the rights of hybrids, while others demanded their isolation or even elimination. "The controversy has forced both governments to address the ethical implications of hybrid beings," Zorn explained. "Your existence challenges everything we thought we knew about our species' boundaries." Mark felt a wave of guilt and uncertainty wash over him, amplified by Mira's own emotional response through their link. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zorn's expression softened. "I've proposed that you become official ambassadors for a new era of human-benzite relations. Your unique perspective could be invaluable in bridging the gap between our worlds." Before they could respond, an alert chimed on Zorn's communicator. His face darkened as he read the message. "We've received intelligence that Commander Thorne has gone into hiding. Reports suggest he's gathering support from extremist factions on both planets, planning to create more hybrids and establish a new interstellar power." The news sent a chill through Mark and Mira. The memory of Thorne's attempted kidnapping was still fresh in their minds. As the days passed, Mark and Mira settled into a routine at Nexus 1. They spent hours in the research labs, working with Dr. Chen and her team to understand their new abilities. Their enhanced strength and sensory perception proved to be stable, as did their telepathic link. That link, however, presented its own challenges. As their relationship deepened, Mark and Mira struggled to maintain their individual identities while sharing an unprecedented level of intimacy. One evening, as they sat in their shared quarters, Mira's thoughts brushed against Mark's mind. "Do you ever wish we could go back?" she asked silently. Mark turned to face her, taking in her altered yet still beautiful features. "To what we were before?" he said aloud, the question hanging in the air between them. Before Mira could respond, an alarm blared throughout the facility. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors as a computerized voice announced, "Life support malfunction detected in Sector 3. All personnel evacuate immediately." Mark and Mira sprang into action, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to navigate the chaotic corridors with ease. As they helped evacuate panicked staff members, a nagging suspicion grew in both their minds. "This doesn't feel like an accident," Mark said, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of sabotage. Mira nodded, her expression grim. "We need to investigate. If someone's trying to destabilize Nexus 1... Their thoughts aligned, and without another word, they set off toward the life support control room. As they approached, they heard the sound of a struggle within. Mark kicked open the door, revealing a scene of chaos. Inside, they found Dr. Coda, a respected Benzite scientist, wrestling with a security guard over a device that was clearly not part of the standard equipment. As Mark and Mira burst in, Coda's eyes widened in panic. "Stop!" Mark shouted, his enhanced strength allowing him to easily separate the two. Mira quickly disabled the device, her Benzite technical knowledge combining seamlessly with her new hybrid intuition. As the life support systems stabilized, security personnel flooded into the room. Dr. Coda, realizing he was cornered, slumped in defeat. "Thorn promised us a new future," he muttered, "a chance to rewrite the rules of our species." As Coda was led away, Mark and Mira exchanged a look of relentless drive. The threat they faced was real, and it was clear their journey was just the beginning. With Nexus 1 secure for the moment, they knew the true challenge lay ahead, navigating the complex web of politics, ethics, and personal identity that their existence had created. Ambassador Zorn approached them, his expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You've proven yourselves invaluable once again," he said. "But I'm afraid this is just the beginning. We've received word that Earth and Benzar have agreed to hold a historic summit here at Nexus 1. They want you to address the delegates." Mark felt a surge of anxiety, amplified by Mira's own apprehension through their link. As they stood there, the weight of their responsibility settling on their shoulders, they realized that their next steps would shape not just their own futures, but potentially the future of two entire worlds. The enormity of their responsibility caused great concern upon them as they prepared for the upcoming summit. In the days leading up to the event, Mark and Mira spent countless hours working with Ambassador Zorn and Dr. Chen to craft their address. They pored over diplomatic protocols, historical precedents, and the latest scientific data on their unique physiology. Their telepathic link proved invaluable, allowing them to seamlessly refine their ideas and rehearse their delivery. As the day of the summit arrived, Nexus 1 buzzed with activity. Delegates from Earth and Benzar filed into the newly constructed conference hall, their diverse forms a testament to the vastness of interstellar life. Mark and Mira stood backstage, their hearts racing in perfect synchronization. Ambassador Zorn approached them, his expression solemn. "Remember, you represent more than just yourselves today. You embody the potential for our species to come together in ways we never imagined possible." Mark nodded, feeling Mira's purpose strengthen his own. They stepped onto the stage, the harsh lights illuminating their hybrid features for all to see. The hall fell silent as they began to speak, their voices blending in a harmony of human and Benzite tones. Their address was a powerful testament to the potential of human-Benzite cooperation. They spoke of their personal journey, the challenges they had faced, and the incredible discoveries they had made. As they concluded, a palpable sense of hope filled the room. Suddenly, the air shimmered near the back of the hall. Before anyone could react, a group of armed individuals materialized, their weapons trained on the delegates. Panic erupted as the extremists, loyal to Commander Jax Thorn, launched their surprise attack. Mark and Mira's enhanced senses kicked into overdrive. They leapt into action, their movements fluid and coordinated. Security forces scrambled to respond, but the attackers' advanced cloaking technology gave them a significant advantage. Through their telepathic link, Mark and Mira formulated a plan. They split up, using their enhanced strength and agility to outmaneuver the extremists. Mark vaulted over a row of seats, tackling an attacker who was targeting a group of Earth diplomats. Mira slid beneath a table, emerging on the other side to disarm two more assailants. As they fought, Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the facility's communication system. "Mark, Mira, the hybridization process, it's still evolving. You may have abilities you haven't discovered yet, Trust your instincts. Heeding her words, Mark reached out with his mind, feeling a strange tug in the pit of his stomach. To his amazement, he found himself able to manipulate the gravity around him. With a thought, he sent 3 attackers floating helplessly toward the ceiling. Mira, witnessing Mark's newfound power, focused her own concentration. A shimmering, translucent barrier sprang to life around her, deflecting a barrage of energy weapons. She had developed the ability to generate bioelectric shields. Their new abilities turned the tide of the battle. Working in tandem, they pushed back against the extremists, protecting the delegates and slowly gaining the upper hand. Amidst the chaos, a heart-stopping moment occurred. Ambassador Zorn, seeing a group of Earth diplomats in the line of fire, threw himself in front of them. The energy blast meant for the humans struck him squarely in the chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. The sight of the Benzite ambassador risking his life for humans sent shockwaves through the conference hall. Earth and Benzar delegates alike rushed to his aid, their previous divisions forgotten in the face of this selfless act. Mark and Mira fought their way to Zorn's side. Using their combined strength, they carried him swiftly to the medical bay, their actions further cementing their status as symbols of cooperation. As they emerged from the medical bay, alarms blared throughout the facility. The extremists, realizing their plan was failing, had activated a device designed to destabilize Nexus 1's structural integrity. The entire base was at risk of catastrophic decompression. Without hesitation, Mark and Mira raced toward the source of the danger. They found themselves in a control room, facing a complex array of human and Benzite technology. The device pulsed with ominous energy, its countdown rapidly approaching 0. Drawing on their unique blend of knowledge, they set to work. Mark's understanding of human engineering complemented Mira's expertise in Benzite systems. Their hybrid physiology allowed them to process information at an astonishing rate, their fingers flying over control panels and holographic interfaces. With seconds to spare, they managed to neutralize the device. However, as it powered down, it released a final burst of the same energy that had triggered their initial transformation. The wave washed over them, leaving them momentarily stunned. As the dust settled and security forces rounded up the remaining extremists, Earth and Benzar's representatives gathered in the conference hall. The attack had done more to unite the two species than years of diplomatic efforts. Unanimously, they agreed to form a joint task force to hunt down Commander Thorn and dismantle his network. Mark and Mira, still reeling from their exposure to the second burst of genetic alteration energy, found themselves at the center of attention once again. Representatives from both worlds approached them, expressing gratitude and admiration for their actions. Dr. Chen arrived, her face a mixture of concern and excitement. "We need to run a full examination immediately," she insisted, ushering them toward the medical bay. "That second exposure could have accelerated your hybridization process." As they followed her, Mark and Mira exchanged glances. They could already feel changes occurring within them, their bond growing stronger by the moment. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they would face it together, as living embodiments of what humanity and Benzite could achieve in harmony. Unity. Whatever the future held, they would face it as one. Weeks passed, and the joint Earth-Benzite task force made significant progress in tracking down Commander Thorn's network. Intelligence reports narrowed down the location of his hidden base to a remote star system on the fringes of known space. With their unique abilities and intimate knowledge of Thorn's operations, Mark and Mira were the natural choice to lead the mission to infiltrate and neutralize the threat. As their starship entered the target system, an eerie silence fell over the bridge. The vast emptiness of space seemed to close in around them, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep from the control consoles. "Anything on sensors?" Mark asked, his eyes scanning the viewport for any sign of their quarry. Mira shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Nothing yet. Wait." She leaned forward, her fingers dancing across the holographic display. "There's something strange about that planet ahead." As they approached, a massive energy field shimmered into view, enveloping a small, rocky world. The ship's systems began to falter, screens flickering as interference disrupted their sensors and communications. "It's got to be Thorn," Mark said, his heart made. He's using some kind of hybrid technology to mask his base. Mira nodded, her mind already racing through possible solutions. I think I can create a bioelectric shield around the ship. It might allow us to penetrate the field without frying our systems. Without waiting for a response, Mira closed her eyes, focusing her newfound abilities. A translucent bubble of energy began to form around the starship, crackling with power. Mark felt the familiar tingle of Mira's abilities through their mental link, lending his own strength to support her efforts. The ship lurched forward, pushing against the energy field. For a moment, it seemed as if they would be repelled, but then the barrier gave way. They burst through, plunging into the planet's atmosphere in a blaze of superheated air. As the clouds parted, a barren landscape stretched out before them. But Mark's enhanced vision caught something others might have missed, a series of subtle irregularities in the rocky terrain. There, he pointed. Those formations aren't natural. It's camouflage. They set the ship down a safe distance away and led their team of human and benzite operatives toward the hidden entrance. As they approached, Mark and Mira felt a strange resonance with the security systems, as if they were designed to detect pure humans or benzites, but not hybrids like themselves. With a shared glance, they stepped forward. The entrance shimmered and revealed itself, responding to their unique physiology. The team slipped inside, finding themselves in a sprawling underground complex that seemed to be a twisted fusion of human and benzite architecture. "Split up," Mark ordered. "We'll cover more ground. Stay in constant communication." As Mark and Mira pressed deeper into the facility, they encountered a sight that chilled them to their core. Lining the walls were rows upon rows of stasis pods, each containing a partially transformed human or benzite. The expressions of pain and confusion frozen on their faces spoke volumes about the horrors Thorn had inflicted. "We need to find Thorn and shut this down," Mira whispered, her voice tight with anger and revulsion. They moved swiftly through the complex, their hybrid senses allowing them to avoid patrols and security measures. Finally, they reached a massive set of doors emblazoned with a symbol that combined elements of both human and benzite script. "This has to be it," Mark said. "Thorn's main lab." With a combined effort of strength and bioelectric manipulation, they forced the doors open. Inside, they found a cavernous chamber filled with humming machinery. At its center stood Commander Thorn, his back to them as he worked feverishly at a control panel, connected to an enormous device. "Thorn!" Mark called out. "It's over! Surrender now!" The commander whirled around, his eyes widening in shock and then narrowing with hatred. "Mark, Mira, my first success stories." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Come to admire my handiwork?" "We've come to stop you," Mira replied, her hands crackling with energy. "This ends now." Thorn's face twisted into a manic grin. "Oh, but you're too late. My life's work is about to reach its glorious conclusion." He gestured to the device behind him. "This machine will broadcast the hybridization energy across both Earth and Benzar. Billions will be transformed in an instant. A new era of hybrid supremacy will begin." Before Mark and Mira could react, Thorn slammed his hand down on a control panel. Alarms blared throughout the facility as the massive device began to power up, a countdown appearing on screens throughout the lab. "Stop them!" Thorn roared into a communicator. Immediately, doors burst open as genetically enhanced guards poured into the chamber. Mark and Mira sprang into action. Mark reached out with his mind, manipulating gravity to send a group of attackers crashing into the ceiling. Mira's bioelectric shield sprang to life, deflecting a barrage of energy weapons. The battle raged through the laboratory, equipment sparking and exploding around them. Through their mental link, Mark and Mira coordinated their movements with inhuman precision, covering each other's blind spots and striking in tandem. As they fought, they worked their way closer to Thorn's device. The countdown ticked ever lower, adding urgency to their already frantic efforts. "We need to shut it down," Mira shouted over the chaos. Mark nodded, using his gravity powers to clear a path to the control panel. Together, they began to work on the complex system, their hybrid minds processing the mix of human and benzite technology at lightning speed. Suddenly, Thorn appeared behind them, his face contorted with rage. "I won't let you ruin everything!" He lunged forward, grappling with Mark. In the struggle, Thorn was thrown against the device. A panel broke open, bathing him in a concentrated burst of hybridization energy. His screams of agony filled the chamber as his body began to twist and change, growing larger and more monstrous by the second. Mark and Mira watched in horror as Thorn's transformation spiraled out of control, his form becoming a nightmarish amalgamation of human and benzite features. The sight steeled their persistence. This was the fate they had to prevent for billions of innocent lives. With revitalized commitment, they turned back to the device. Mark used his gravity manipulation to contain the building energy, while Mira's fingers flew over the controls, reconfiguring the broadcast array. The countdown reached its final seconds. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as they pushed their abilities to the limit. Just as it seemed they might fail, something clicked into place. The energy contained by Mark suddenly reversed direction, flowing back into the machine. The device shuddered, its components overloading as it imploded in on itself. A shockwave of power rippled outward, plunging the entire facility into darkness. As emergency lights flickered to life, Mark and Mira surveyed the destruction around them. The threat of mass hybridization had been averted, but the challenges they faced were far from finished. The stasis pods throughout the facility still held countless victims of Thorn's experiments, their fates uncertain. In the eerie quiet that followed the battle, Mark and Mira shared a look of unshakable focus. They had won this fight, but the war for acceptance and understanding between humans, benzites, and hybrids was just beginning. Hand in hand, they set off to secure the facility and free Thorn's victims, ready to face whatever came next, together. Next, as they stepped out of the facility, the weight of their responsibility settled upon their shoulders. The journey back to Earth was a blur of activity. Mark and Mira worked tirelessly alongside Dr. Chen and her team to stabilize the rescued hybrids, their unique physiology proving invaluable in understanding and treating the various stages of transformation. The ship's corridors buzzed with a mixture of hope and uncertainty as they drew closer to home. Upon entering Earth's atmosphere, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. The skies around their landing zone were filled with news drones and hovering vehicles, their cameras trained on the descending ship. As the loading ramp lowered, Mark and Mira found themselves facing a sea of flashing lights and shouted questions. "This is unexpected," Mark muttered, squinting against the glare. Mira squeezed his hand. "We knew this day would come. Let's face it together." They stepped forward, shielding their eyes as they scanned the crowd. Among the throng of reporters and curious onlookers, they spotted a familiar face, Ambassador Zorn, standing tall despite the visible scars from his recent ordeal. The ambassador raised his hand, and a hush fell over the crowd. "People of Earth," he began, his voice amplified by unseen speakers. "Today marks a new chapter in the history of our two species. The existence of human benzite hybrids can no longer be denied or hidden. It is time for us to embrace this new reality and work together towards a future of understanding and cooperation." As Zorn spoke, Mark and Mira guided the first of the rescued hybrids down the ramp. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of gasps, murmurs, and a few scattered cheers. Cameras whirred and clicked, capturing every moment of this historic event. In the days that followed, Mark and Mira found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The United Earth Government and Benzite High Council moved swiftly to establish the Hybrid Integration Committee, with Mark and Mira appointed as co-chairs. Their days became a blur of meetings, press conferences, and endless paperwork. One evening, as they sat in their newly assigned quarters, reviewing the latest batch of medical reports, Mira looked up from her datapad with a sigh. "Mark, do you ever wonder if we're doing enough?" Mark set down his own device and met her gaze. "What do you mean?" "It's just, we're making progress, but it feels so slow. Every decision we make affects the lives of these hybrids. The weight of it all sometimes feels overwhelming." Before Mark could respond, their communication console chimed. Dr. Chen's holographic image appeared, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Mark, Mira, I have news," she said without preamble. "We've made a breakthrough in stabilizing the hybrid's conditions. The treatment we've developed should halt any further uncontrolled mutations." Mark leaned forward, his fatigue forgotten. That's incredible, Doctor. What are the implications? Dr. Chen's image flickered as she gestured to unseen data. It means the subjects can retain their current hybrid forms without risk of degradation. More importantly, it opens up possibilities for future generations. The meaning behind her words hung in the air. Mira and Mark exchanged a look, the implications of future generations not lost on them. As news of the breakthrough spread, so did public curiosity about Mark and Mira's relationship. They found themselves constantly dodging paparazzi, their every move scrutinized and speculated upon. The pressure began to take its toll, creating moments of tension between them. One day, as they hurried from one meeting to another, a particularly persistent group of reporters cornered them. Cameras flashed and questions flew rapid fire. Mark, Mira, how do you respond to claims that your relationship is unnatural? Is it true that you're planning to have children? Do you believe hybrids should have the same rights as pure humans and benzites? Mark felt Mira tense beside him. He opened his mouth to respond, but she beat him to it. Our relationship is our own business, Mira said, her voice firm but controlled. As for the rights of hybrids, that's precisely what the Hybrid Integration Committee is working to address. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have important work to do. As they pushed through the crowd, Mark whispered, "Nice deflection." Mira's lips quirked in a small smile. "I learned from the best." Their moment of levity was short-lived. Upon entering their next meeting, they were greeted by Ambassador Zorn's serious expression. "We have a situation," Zorn said without preamble. "A proposal has been put forward for the establishment of a hybrid autonomous zone, a space station orbiting between Earth and Benzar." Mark and Mira listened intently as Zorn outlined the proposal. The idea of a dedicated space for hybrids to live and govern themselves was both intriguing and concerning. "What do you think?" Zorn asked, his eyes moving between them. Mark leaned back, considering. "It could provide a safe haven for hybrids who feel out of place on either Earth or Benzar, but there's also a risk of it being seen as segregation." Mira nodded. "We need to be careful how we present this. The last thing we want is for hybrids to feel like they're being pushed aside or hidden away." As they debated the merits and risks of the HAZ proposal, a notification flashed across their datapads. Mark's eyes widened as he read the message. "There's been an attack on a hybrid shelter in New Shanghai," he said, his voice tight, "and reports of similar incidents on Benzar." The room erupted into action. As Mark and Mira rushed to coordinate a response, they knew that the challenge ahead was greater than they had ever imagined. The future of human-benzite relations and the fate of hybrids across two worlds hung in the balance. And somewhere out there, the transformed Commander Thorne remained at large, a looming threat to everything they had worked for. As they left the meeting room, determined to face this new crisis head-on, Mark and Mira shared a look of unwavering willpower. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as partners, as leaders, and as living proof of what humans and benzites could achieve in harmony. Mark and Mira stood at the viewport, gazing at the lunar landscape below. The private facility had become their temporary haven, a place to regroup and plan their next move. They turned to face each other, a shared understanding passing between them. "We can't hide forever," Mark said, breaking the silence. Mira nodded. "It's time we took a stand, not just for ourselves, but for all hybrids." Their decision crystallized in that moment. They would become the first residents of the hybrid autonomous zone, leading by example and shaping the future of human-benzite relations. The announcement sent shockwaves through both Earth and Benzar. News broadcasts buzzed with speculation and debate. Mark and Mira found themselves thrust even further into the spotlight, their every move scrutinized as they prepared for their historic departure. In the days leading up to their departure, Dr. Chen insisted on a final round of medical examinations. The couple sat side by side in the pristine lab, fingers intertwined as they awaited the results. Dr. Chen entered, her face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I have some interesting news," she began, her eyes darting between them. "Our tests confirm that you are reproductively compatible. In theory, you could conceive a child together, the first naturally born hybrid." The implications hit them like a shockwave. Mark's grip on Mira's hand tightened, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns. Mira voiced the question they were both thinking. Is it safe? For us? For a potential child? Dr. Chen's expression softened. Based on our current understanding, yes, but we're in uncharted territory here. The choice is yours, of course. As they left the lab, the weight of this new information settled upon them. The potential to create life, to bridge their two species in the most fundamental way, was both thrilling and terrifying. The day of the HAZ launch dawned bright and clear. A grand ceremony had been organized, with dignitaries from Earth and Benzar gathered to bid farewell to Mark and Mira. The air crackled with anticipation and an undercurrent of tension. As Mark stepped up to the podium to deliver his speech, a commotion erupted from the crowd. A group of figures in dark clothing pushed their way forward, weapons materializing in their hands. "Death to the abominations!" one of them shouted, raising a plasma rifle. Time seemed to slow. Mark reached out with his mind, manipulating gravity to yank the weapons from the attacker's hands. Beside him, Mira's bioelectric shield sprang to life, enveloping the nearby dignitaries in a protective cocoon. The would-be assassins found themselves disarmed and pinned to the ground by an invisible force. Security forces swarmed in, quickly subduing the threat. In the aftermath of the attack, Mark and Mira stood tall, their actions having spoken louder than any speech could. The incident only strengthened public support for the HAZ and its hybrid residents. With security measures drastically increased, the day of departure finally arrived. Mark and Mira boarded the sleek shuttle that would carry them to their new home. As the engines ignited, they looked out at the sea of faces below. Humans and Benzites united in this moment of history. The journey to the HAZ passed in a blur of emotion and anticipation. As they approached the massive space station, its gleaming hull a testament to joint human-Benzite engineering, Mark and Mira felt a surge of pride and purpose. They were greeted by the first wave of hybrid settlers, their faces a mix of hope and uncertainty. Mark and Mira stepped forward, ready to lead this fledgling community into a new era. Weeks passed as they settled into their roles, facing the monumental task of establishing a functioning society from scratch. The challenges were many, but the spirit of cooperation among the hybrid residents was inspiring. One evening, as Mark and Mira reviewed plans for the station's agricultural section, an alarm blared through the command center. The long-range sensors had detected an unidentified vessel approaching at high speed. "What do we know?" Mark asked, leaning over the sensor display. The HAZ's chief of security, a tall hybrid named Kira, shook her head. "Not much. It's small, fast, and not responding to hails." As the minutes ticked by, tension mounted. The unknown ship drew closer, its erratic flight path suggesting a pilot in distress or one with sinister intent. Suddenly, a garbled transmission cut through the static. A face appeared on the monitor, twisted and monstrous, yet horrifyingly familiar. "Thorn," Mira whispered, her eyes wide with shock. The former commander's features were barely recognizable, further mutated by his unstable hybrid condition. His eyes blazed with a manic light as he spoke. "I've come to claim what's rightfully mine," Thorn snarled. "This station, this haven for abominations. It's all because of me. My work, my vision." Mark stepped forward, his voice steady. "Stand down, Thorn. You're sick. We can help you." Thorn's laughter was a harsh, grating sound. "Help me? I'm beyond your help. I'm beyond anything you can imagine." With that, Thorn's ship accelerated, clearly intent on ramming the station. Mark and Mira sprang into action, coordinating with the HAZ's defense systems. "Mira, take the shields," Mark called out. "I'll try to deflect him." As Mira's fingers flew over the controls, reinforcing the station's energy barriers, Mark reached out with his mind. He enveloped Thorn's ship in a gravitational field, attempting to alter its course. The ship shuddered and bucked against Mark's control. Thorn's maniacal laughter echoed through the command center as he fought back, his own mutated abilities clashing with Mark's powers. For heart-stopping moments, it seemed Thorn might break through. Then, with a final push of concentration, Mark managed to divert the ship's course. It skimmed the station's outer hull, missing by mere meters. But Thorn wasn't done. As his ship arced away, It unleashed a barrage of weapons fire. The HAZ shook under the assault, alarms blaring throughout the station. "Hull breach in Section 7, Kira shouted. "He's trying to board us." Mark and Mira shared a look of relentless drive. They had faced Thorn before, and they would face him again. Together, they raced towards the breach point, ready to defend their new home and the future they were building. As they ran, the station trembled beneath their feet. The battle for the hybrid, autonomous zone, and perhaps the future of human-benzite relations, had only just begun. Mark and Mira moved swiftly through the corridors, their hybrid physiology allowing them to outpace the station's security team. As they approached the breach point, the sound of twisting metal and sparking circuitry grew louder. "Thorn's more unstable than ever," Mark said, his voice tight with concern. "We need to contain him quickly." Mira nodded, her bioelectric shields already forming around her hands. "Remember, we're stronger together. Don't let him separate us." They rounded the corner to find Thorn in the midst of destroying a control panel. His body had further mutated, his skin a mottled mix of human and benzite textures, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Ah, the happy couple," Thorn sneered, turning to face them. "Come to welcome me to your little paradise?" Mark stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's over, Thorn. You need help. Let us—" Thorn's laugh cut him off. "Help! I don't need help. I need what's rightfully mine." He lunged forward, his mutated form granting him inhuman speed. Mark reacted instinctively, creating a gravitational field to slow Thorn's advance. Mira flanked him, her shields deflecting debris. Thorn hurled their way. The battle raged through the station, Thorn's attacks growing more erratic and powerful. Mark and Mira worked in perfect synchronization, their hybrid abilities complementing each other as they fought to subdue the crazed commander. Finally, cornered in the station's hydroponics bay, Thorn collapsed, his body racked with convulsions. As Mark moved to restrain him, Mira noticed something in Thorn's eyes, a flicker of fear, of desperation. "Wait," she said, placing a hand on Mark's arm. She knelt beside Thorn, maintaining her shield but softening her expression. "Commander, you're in pain. Let us help you. We've made advancements in stabilizing hybrid physiology. We can ease your suffering." For a moment, Thorn's face cleared, a glimpse of his former self shining through. Then, with a howl of anguish, he lashed out one final time before falling unconscious. In the days that followed, as Thorn was placed in stasis for treatment, Mark and Mira found themselves thrust into a new role, not just as leaders of the HAZ, but as symbols of hope for a united future. As they stood in the station's medical bay, watching Dr. Chen and her team work on stabilizing Thorn, Mira turned to Mark. "We can't let fear dictate our future," she said softly. "We need to show everyone, humans, benzites, and hybrids, that there's a better way forward." Mark nodded, a determined glint in his eye. "You're right. It's time we took the next step." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Mira, what do you think about starting a family?" The question hung in the air between them, full of possibility and hope. Mira's eyes widened, a mix of excitement and apprehension crossing her face. "A family? You mean—" "Yes," Mark said, his voice steady. "The first naturally conceived hybrid child. Dr. Chen's research shows it's possible. We could be the pioneers, just like we've been for everything else." Mira's free hand unconsciously moved to her abdomen. "It would change everything," she whispered. "Are we ready for that kind of responsibility?" Mark smiled, pulling her close. "We've faced everything else together. Why not this?" As they embraced, the reality of their decision began to sink in. They would be charting unknown territory, not just for themselves, but for all of human-benzite relations. The news of their intention spread quickly through the HAZ, igniting a wave of excitement and anticipation among the residents. Preparations began immediately, with Dr. Chen taking charge of Mira's prenatal care. Months passed, and the HAZ buzzed with activity. Mark and Mira continued their leadership duties while preparing for the arrival of their child. The station expanded its medical facilities, and cultural programs celebrating both human and benzite traditions flourished. As Mira's pregnancy progressed, delegations from Earth and Benzar arrived to witness this historic event. The Has transformed into a hub of interstellar diplomacy, with representatives from both worlds eager to be part of this momentous occasion. One afternoon, as Mark conducted a routine maintenance check in the life support systems, he noticed an anomaly. Digging deeper, he uncovered a hidden sabotage device, a final, desperate act of vengeance from Thorn. Mark's heart raced as he realized the implications. He immediately contacted Mira and the station's security team. Together, they worked to neutralize the threat, showcasing their unwavering commitment to their community's safety. As they disabled the device, Mira suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her swollen belly. "Mark," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. "I think it's time." Mark's eyes widened. He looked at Mira, then at the disabled sabotage device, then back at Mira. In that moment, he knew their greatest challenge and their greatest adventure was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.